Do you remember the Mars Opportunity rover? A little while ago, it was left there. It turned off, it went kaput. And its last broadcast was basically along the lines of, my battery is low and it's getting dark. Which is heartbreaking and tragic, and made everybody on the internet very, very sad. But it's just a robot, so why did everybody care so much? Well, I think that it's a very interesting statement about human beings that we anthropomorphise and sympathise with anything. To quote the great Jeff Winger, I could call this pencil Derek, and you'd all get really sad when I snapped it. I don't know if that's the exact quote, but the point still stands. Will we get sad over something we know is inanimate, is lifeless, essentially? Well, quite provenly, yes, but I want to make a game to test that. So I'm going to make a game about a sad robot. I think part of what made the Opportunity rover so endearing is that people called it Oppie instead of Opportunity. What kind of a name's Opportunity? Nobody's going to say that, it's too long. But for my robot, I need an equally long and confusing official name so that everybody can give it a cute little nickname. So I've gone with the word peregrination. I hope I pronounced that right, because I've never heard of this word before. But it's in the dictionary apparently. That means that I can shorten my robot's name to Perry. So with that idea in mind, I went to Blender and busted out my very best square making skills and came up with this, which I think we can all agree is a work of absolute horror. It's awful, absolutely dreadful. But there was an idea, at least. So these little nubs here, these appendages, were going to be cameras. That was going to be where the cameras were mounted. You could switch between them. And it would look like you were driving a real rover, because you were on board, you know? Like, you won't have a flying camera in real life. That would be silly. That would be expensive. That would be just impractical. But in game, it's just very nauseating. You don't want to be bolted to something that's moving around a lot, because it just is confusing and not very fun. You'll also notice that I haven't added wheels. She's just going to float there, because I can't be bothered to animate wheels. That sounds like a lot of effort. So she's a future rover. She's going to hover, she's going to fly, and it's all going to be fun and nobody's going to question it at all. But at the moment, she doesn't hover in the slightest. In fact, if you press the play button, we can see that she's a sum total of absolutely nothing. She just sits there. Useless. Absolutely useless. So let's fix that. So to make Perry hover, I've added these hover points, which are just empty transforms. There's no components on them, but we will use these as they are in each corner of the model. As you can see, they're underneath each of these horrible blocks. So in the code, what we do is we pass them into this hover function. So for each one, we will send a raycast down, and we will then do some maths to get a number based on how far away from the ground they are. So if it's further away from the ground, the number will be lower. If it's closer, the number will be higher. We clamp that to be some sort of maximum, so it doesn't just fly infinitely. And then we apply that force to each corner. So we do that for each of the hover points. As you can see here, we will grab each of them and do that every single update. So then, if we run the game, what should happen is Perry should push away from the ground and float, which is great. What's not so great is that she still doesn't move anywhere, doesn't do anything yet. She just doesn't like touching the floor anymore. So before I got to work on making it move, I got bored of looking at that oversized block with sticks on it. So I made this cute little guy, which is much closer to the final model. It's not the final model, because spoiler alert, I've already remade him like 3 times, but this is much closer to the final design, with a big, nice eyes, and a tank on the back, and a head that can move. Well, it has the ability to move. It can't move yet, because I ain't done that. I've just made a model. Come on. And despite this glow up, it still can't move, the selfish thing. So let's make it move. So to make Perry move, I've added this function here, which will grab the player's input, and for forwards and backwards, we will just add a force in that direction. But we also will add a bit of torque, because without that, what would happen is Perry would just sort of float forwards, and it would just look weird and out of place. Whereas in real life, if something is applying a force to move forwards, it will rock forwards, and if it was going backwards, it will rock backwards. So now Perry will rock back and forth, for as long as you can be bothered to make her do it. I've also added a torque, so when you go left and right, she will lean left and right. But with left and right, I didn't want the player to be able to move that quickly left and right, so what I've done is I've just added torque, and because of the way the hovering works, she actually pushes away from the ground, which is very nice indeed. Nice little side benefit there, gotta love that. Shaking my fingers at you, but you can't see that. But just know that I am, because it's lovely, beautiful. But of course the problem then is that if I'm going forwards, or backwards apparently, I'm going backwards, if I'm going forwards and I want to go to the right, that's not very quick, and doing this all the time is boring, and I can't actually get that much control. So I've also added the ability for Perry to pirouette, or just rotate if you're boring. But no, she can turn around now, which means that I can do cool stuff like this. But to test out this new movement, I've added some new terrain that I can bounce off and bump into, and in general just crash around in. And just to make sure that I can see where Perry's going, I've also added a super basic camera controller. And when I say basic, I mean basic. I mean like white t-shirt, blonde hair, pumpkin spice latte basic. I mean, this is literally it. It's 3 lines of code, and one of those is assigning a variable. So what I do is I very cleverly grab the position of the player, and I set their position and their rotation to be my position and rotation. Isn't that genius? So back in the scene, I have added that script to an empty game object, which is just at the same position of the player, as it will be every frame, and then as a child of that is the main camera, which is looking down. So literally it will just get dragged along like it's on a big old stick, like a crane camera. That's the thing, right? So this will get pulled along, and then the camera will view Perry from behind. Ooh, that's a bit pervy. Now, earlier I mentioned that I wanted Perry to be able to move her head, which is because I am a very pretentious auteur, and as part of that I have weird ideas which aren't that relevant really. The game would be fine without this idea, but I think it adds that little extra bit of, je ne sais quoi. And that is, I want Perry to be able to look up at the stars while she's performing her job, so that we can feel that she's more human, more relatable, because who doesn't want to look up at the stars? So to do that, I've added some extra code to the camera controller, using lerps and angles, which are everybody's favourite thing to do. So what we do is I check if the player is looking up, or if they're holding the button for look up, I should say, and then I change the X rotation to be in an up position. I lerp from the current angle to the upward angle, and if they're not, then I do the opposite. I lerp to the down angle, which I have, I've collected multiple awards for how well these are named already. What this results in is I have a seizure. So the problem with that is that I was just getting the transform for this object, which is the camera controller, not the camera. So every frame I was trying to rotate the camera away from the player, and then I was resetting it myself here, which isn't very sensible. It's not very smart on doing your own work. So it was just constantly going up and down, up and down, up and down. So now I'm rotating the main camera object instead. I'm grabbing their transform and rotating that. So now I'm no longer having a seizure, and if I press look up, then I can look up, which means that this is now working flawless. Oh no. So one small line of code later, and we are fixed. We are all working, and Perry can now drive around and look up. Although it's a bit quick, I'll turn the speed down on that. But yeah, that means that Perry, blah 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 blah. And finally, I wanted Perry to be able to traverse a bit easier over some of these bigger obstacles, because if I go into the play scene here and I try and go over this big hill, it's at such an angle that I just crash into it. Not very dignified, not very helpful. So to do that, it's very simple. What I'm doing is I am checking if the player is pressing boost, and if they still have any boost available, and then I am adding a force directly upwards, and then I'm decrementing the boost timer. And then I do a check for if the player isn't pressing boost, and if the boost isn't at the maximum that it can be, and then the boost will slowly increase. So what that means in-game is that the Perry has boost over here, and if I press space, then boost goes down and Perry flies up. And then when I can't boost anymore, it stops and slowly charges back up again. So that's all of the movement I wanted to give Perry done. But I also wanted to restrict the player by giving them a power level. So you have a certain amount of power in your battery, and if you run out of that, then you game over, you stop. That means that then you'll have to manage your power, and you can't just boost everywhere all the time, and you've got to think about how you traverse. So to do that, I have added all of these little checks here to see if the player is moving, or if they're boosting, or if they're strafing or turning, and each of those will use a different amount of power from the battery. And so that the player knows what's going on, I have added a battery indicator up here, and a boost indicator, so when I boost, you can see how much boost is left. And what happens if I run out of battery, you ask? Good question. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. She just stops. That's it. The game will end when that happens, but yeah, for now she just takes a nap. And that's all I'm going to show for this video. My aim is to finish this game before the end of the year, because I have terrible problems when I don't have a deadline. But the plan is to release this by the end of the year, have a video out every week updating you on where I've got to, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks.